Welcome to the Princeton Festival podcast, where we take you behind the scenes of New Jersey's premier performing arts festival. With directors, producers, artists, and supporters, we explore the creative process and the challenges of making music today. Join us on this musical adventure. Welcome to another episode in the Princeton Festival podcast. My name is Eva Kastner-Puschel. Today we're going to hear from Venezuelan-American conductor, scholar, and interdisciplinary artist Carmen Helena-Téllez, who has been called a quiet force behind contemporary music in the United States today by the New York-based journal Sequenza 21. Hello, Carmen, and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Eva, for inviting me. And thank you for allowing me to interact with a wonderful audience and supporters of the Princeton Festival.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure having you on today's podcast. Please tell us briefly where you're coming from today.
I am a professor at the University of Notre Dame, and I do my artistic work mostly in Chicago.
Carmen, you would have directed an exciting interdisciplinary event at the Princeton Festival this season, which we were all looking forward to, but which we had to cancel due to the current situation around COVID-19. While we are disappointed, we are excited to hear about you and your projects on today's show. Let me start off by saying that your bio and career path are impressive. You studied piano and composition, earned a Doctor of Music degree with a letter of highest distinction at Indiana University in 1989, went on to be a conductor and distinguished scholar and lecturer at Notre Dame University, have appeared in a TEDx talk, and are an advocate for an expanded understanding of the concept of art music and for including underrepresented composers and genres in performances. Can you tell us a bit about your career as a creative artist, composer, producer, researcher, and administrator, and how you find time to wear all of these different hats?
So, Eva, on the surface, it looks like I have had many different hats and done many different careers. But in fact, when you look closer, I've been doing essentially the same thing all along, as a conductor and as a creative producer. The role of creative producer as such has always existed in classical music, and it's become more recognized now. But it has existed because composers and conductors were essentially the same person for many eras in music history. In the role of a creative producer, you want to control all aspects of the presentation as an administrator, possibly as a composer, as a scholar, and so on. And for all kinds of reasons, I started behaving that way from the beginning of my career, even though I am a conductor as my central disciplinary training.
Now, you mention that you are a conductor first and foremost. And many of us observe conductors in performance, but we know so little about what goes into the conductor's craft. Can you perhaps tell us briefly what the conductor is responsible for and how important she or he is in works that involve singers, dancers, instrumentalists, etc.?
So conductors emerged rather late in music history as the ensembles became larger and larger. What the conductor does that is essential is to decide the interpretive direction of an interpretation. Because when we do chamber music, for example, or choral chamber music, the individual artists can discuss among themselves what they would like to say or to express, decisions about dynamics, about speed, tempo, etc. But when you have very large ensembles, this negotiation is no longer possible. So it is the conductor, the one that decides, studying the score and studying all the potentials of everybody involved, in which direction the interpretation will go. When you involve other artists, then the conductor can become a creative producer and establish a negotiation and an act of co-creation with the other artists.
I like the idea of the conductor being a co-creator. Coming back to what you just said about the role of the conductor not having been established until later, it seems that women artists have also not been established until much later, or let's say have been underrepresented throughout history, even up to this day. How do you achieve parity in the field of the arts, and why do you suppose that we still haven't reached that point yet?
So, well, of course, that is a very important question, but let me prelude it with perception I have. I mentioned that the role of the conductor emerged late, but that did not mean that nobody was conducting or that nobody was directing. It was simply that the person that was perhaps leading the group was doing it perhaps from the violin as a concertmaster, or being a composer that had his own um, vocal group. It's the role of the conductor that we see now with a baton and leading very large ensembles that we have become aware of late. And the same thing happens with women. Women have been involved with the arts all along. Um, we are now discovering that in cloistered environments, the nuns were producing beautiful compositions. We also know that women are the ones that carry, let's say, the practice of supporting artists today. They sit in boards, they encourage young artists in so many different ways. So it's more a matter of documentation that society so far has documented very much the role of men in the arts, but not the role of women. Now, I don't mean to neglect the reality that we do need to give more opportunities to women. I think that parity will be achieved by talking about it and by the organizations very deliberately trying to include equal numbers of women with the men in their organizations.
Absolutely, I agree. So I see that you involve women and men very equally in your projects, but you also seem to be very inclusive in terms of mingling music with other art forms. Your dissertation project on an oratorio by Handel was your first to deal with this interaction between music and other arts, but there have since been a lot more. So let's talk about what inspired you to take an interdisciplinary approach to your projects and performances.
You know, at the moment when that happened, I was not conscious that this was something interdisciplinary as such. I have always been attracted to all the arts, especially I have always established some relationship between the visual and the musical since I was a child, and I still paint and draw as much as I am conducting and now returning to composition. So it was simply an awareness of a sympathy between this particular work of Handel, of George Frederick Handel, the Oratorio Athaliah, a sympathy between how that work was structured and the way I thought about music, and that just simply developed gradually. But over time, as I have moved more and more in the direction of interdisciplinarity, I have realized that I started really quite early without even being aware of it.
And where do you draw from? Where do you get your most inspiration from?
Well, it so happens that the Handelian oratorio is in itself intrinsically an interdisciplinary form because you do have a relationship between the music and the text. But the origin of the arts was in many ways ritual. The arts were part of the well being of a community, and all the arts were involved. Even liturgy in in all religions is an interdisciplinary art form intrinsically. So you draw it just by simply experiencing life as it develops. It's not separated one from the other. So when you try to represent it, the interdisciplinary reaction is actually quite natural.
One of your independent professional interdisciplinary projects is Cosmologgia, an ongoing artistic and research project that integrates music with other arts. We're going to talk about a project that you led at Notre Dame University with the principles of Cosmologgia. I understand that this is a collective of collaborating artists from different places who you bring together for different projects. Can you tell me a little bit about how that came about?
So I labeled my practice just about 5 or 6 years ago because I wanted to initiate an ongoing relationship with several artists in the manner of a collective. They are not only at the University of Notre Dame, but at Indiana University in Bloomington, where I was trained and where I received a lot of support from my colleagues about this particular way of interpretation. And everywhere I go, I try to establish relationships with artists that are sympathetic to this type of work. So I labeled it Cosmologgia, which is a term that says that we are describing the world through the arts. The arts interpret the world, so to speak.
Let's now hear one of such interpretation. And Carmen, thank you so much for bringing music to today's show. I would like to play 2 excerpts from the 2016 recording of Robert Keir's Paradiso that you provided. It is an interdisciplinary sacred music drama based on Dantes' Divina Commedia that was commissioned and guided by Cosmologgia. The libretto is by living poet Robin Kirkpatrick. The singers include soprano Arwen Myers, soprano Jessica Roberts, mezzo-soprano Jamie Caporizo, and the Notre Dame Vocal as the vocal ensemble conducted by Carmen Helena-Téllez. So let's tune in. So let's fade out here and go right into another short snippet of number 15 titled To Greet the Final Piece, with the singers surrounding the audience like orbits. Thank you for providing these excerpts of Dante's Divine Comedy. Can you tell our listeners about this project and especially the interdisciplinary component?
This project was funded by the Andrew Mellon Foundation, who intriguingly at the time had contacted several universities about sponsoring interdisciplinary study in many different disciplines. And this project about the Divine Comedy was the fourth of a series of 4 sacred dramas that were to be implemented at the University of Notre Dame with the students and faculty at the University of Notre Dame, but also guest artists. And we had great interest in working, on the one hand, with Robin Kirkpatrick, who is a major scholar based at the University of Cambridge, who studies Dante. And then with Robert Keir, American composer based in Oregon, who had great interest in spiritual philosophies of different kinds. And we all joined together to develop an experience where the audience had to take the same journey as Dante. So it meant that they had to go through a representation of Inferno where there was no music, because Dante thought that there was no music in hell. It was more like a theatrical experience. Then we processed like pilgrims in purgatory, and we heard Gregorian chant. And then we returned to the theater to experience Paradiso, which was all musical, nothing was spoken. So, in a way, we tried the audience to experience the role of music as a representation of spirituality for Dante.
And can you share the audience reaction with us? How was it perceived?
The audience liked it very much. It has been my experience that when we invest in making the audience part of the artwork, the audience really, really reacts emotionally and really contributes to what happens to the artwork. In Inferno, there were all kinds of nervous reactions, laughter, and intriguing conversations that took place in the middle of the representation. And when we processed during Purgatory, they were given the opportunity to sing with us. So the reactions were a little bit more personal, so to speak.
Since a lot of your projects involve the audience or spectator as co-creator, how is the modern technology and the trend of streaming music online affecting the future of live classical music?
You know, I think that live classical music is not going to disappear at all. You see in the reaction of people wanting to go out and lamenting the disappearance of concerts. It's not that they do not have music. They still have the recordings. They still have YouTube. They still have streaming. What we miss is experiencing all this together, because there is some kind of energy that is transferred between us. But this period of transition will provoke a more in-depth examination of the artistic potential of all this technology. And I think in the future, they're going to be coexisting with a live art form. We're going to have both of them together, perhaps to enhance the audience participation.
However, if you've never been to a live performance, and I'm speaking especially about the younger generation who grows up with technology and music at their fingertips through those apps and online subscriptions, how do you get them to experience live music? How do they know what they're missing?
Yeah, I can see your concern, but I think it is not likely that they will never experience a live performance, because live performance is part of life. So it is more a matter of the artist reaching out very openly and imaginatively. Artists cannot fall on the trap of always following the same rituals, the same routines, the same conventions. This transition we're going through with the coronavirus crisis is forcing us to realize that we have certain routines, and that the routines are just routines like clothing we wear. We can certainly engage with new conventions, with new modes of touching our audience.
I love your positive outlook, and I really hope that those two forms of music or experiencing music will coexist. However, there's another concern. Live music relies so heavily on donors and contributed support because, as we all know, ticket sales hardly ever cover the cost of the production. What are your thoughts on that matter?
Well, first of all, I'm very grateful to all those donors. Many of them are women indeed that believe in the arts and contribute to the arts because they feel in their hearts that life without the arts is sad, is dark. The arts really do interpret our universe. They help us cope, they help us understand, they help us share with each other. But we need to open up here in the United States the support of the government for the arts. It should be as mixed a foundation of financial support as possible. Everybody should contribute to the arts.
Thank you for saying that. And we're also extremely thankful to all our donors who continue to support us so faithfully throughout the years. Before we part, here are a few rapid fire questions. Haydn or Scarlatti?
Oh my God, it's so difficult to have to choose between the two. I love Haydn because it is a great composer to teach my students how to think about music comprehensively.
Violin or viola?
I had a very interesting experience. To me, they are kind of the same, but I will say the violin, obviously, because of its impact on the development of Western music. I just recently had to do a transcription of Mozart's Magic Flute for an orchestra of Andean instruments. And this was an interesting project of the National Theatre of Ecuador, the Teatro Sucre, and its artistic director, Chia Patiño, who was going to be one of our collaborators in the project for the Princeton Festival. But at that moment, we had great success with this project because it brought to the theater people that had never come to the opera, if only because they were going to hear Mozart with Andean instruments, flutes and charangos. But there I discovered the importance of the violin, which is an incredible machine, such a little box that is able to sing and be rhythmical and be loud and be soft and be high and be low. It's a miracle instrument.
Record player or smartphone?
At this point, the smartphone, if only because I carry it with me and then I can indulge all my impulses to hear music.
Bebop or cool jazz?
I like them both. I like cool jazz because it has been very influential in Latin American music and it's like at the root of many other experimentations. And I love that kind of openness, let's say, to embrace traditions.
Milk chocolate or dark chocolate?
Dark chocolate with orange. That's great.
Mountain or beach?
Mountain.
Is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience that we did not cover today?
I wanted to share that music is not completed on the page of the composer, not even in the action of the performer. Music is really happening in the mind and soul of the person that listens. It's really a whole cycle that ends there. So whatever you hear, that is ultimately what it is. That's why when we go listen to a piece of music, remain active. Put your heart and soul into a dialogue with a piece of music.
Thank you so much for sharing these beautiful words, and I think that's very uplifting in these very difficult times. Carmen, thank you so much for being my guest on today's show. It was a great pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you, Eva. It's been a pleasure.
We will make Cosmologgia's recordings of Kir's Paradiso available for streaming through the link provided in the description of this podcast. To our listeners, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Be sure to visit our website at www.princetonfestival.org to learn more about upcoming events especially our digital season Virtually Yours in June, as well as ways on how to support the festival. Please join us again next time for another exciting episode in our series. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.